I'm Caitlin and welcome to the Lit Review. Today we are doing my full April wrap-up with all of the stats that I like to collect for you. I did do a half-month wrap-up this April, so I've already talked to you about these books, plus Pleasure of a Dark Prince by Kresley Cole. If you want to see my full reviews on those, make sure that you check out the video that I will link in the cards as well as down below. But I will reference these books with my stats, but we won't be talking about these too much today. This is usually the part where I tell you that I have a two-box system where I have a no box and a maybe box that I sort things into depending on how a book went for me in a given month. But I'm just going to tell you right now that all month long I haven't needed either of those boxes. Everything I read was pretty solid, and that's really exciting. This is the second month in a row where I felt really good about the books I've reading, and there haven't been any like duds in the bunch. So that's exciting. That's very good for me. That almost never happens. But let's get into the stats before I get into the two book reviews that I do have to share with you today. And I will link timestamps down below, so if you're interested in a specific review or just want to skip the stats portion, all that will be in the description box. So I read 8 books in April, and that's 2,391 pages read. No audiobooks and no hours listened or anything like that, but my average rating was 4.06. Again, another month where the ratings were just really high because I was enjoying the heck out of what I was reading, and that's so nice. In terms of my audience, I had 7 adult books, or just books intended for a mature audience, and then 1 new adult book. No YA this month, which is very unusual. In terms of genre, it was mostly graphic novels, but the second most read genre this month was romance, which always makes my heart happy. I love to read romance whenever I can, so it was good that I got to sneak in several picks that were romance picks. Again, format, no audiobooks, 2 ebooks this month, and 6 physical books. So again, just kind of balancing that out a little bit more. And it's not really balanced, but for me it's balanced because I don't read a ton of ebooks. Where we talk about unbalanced though is my demographics, like my actual author or character demographics this month. I did so well in March with this, and then in April it was just like, nah, not really. The section that I call author ID, or like what pronouns the author tends to identify with, I read 1 book with an author who used he, him pronouns, and 7 that identified as she, her. Author's preferred racial or ethnic identity section. Most of who I read from this month were white folks, which is not necessarily like bad, but I really enjoy reading diversely, and so it doesn't feel good to have a month where I just don't, even if I really enjoyed the things I was reading. And so 7 of my 8 authors were white, and 1 I'm categorizing in my spreadsheet as unknown because I do not want to misattribute somebody's identity, and I could not, from a little bit of Googling, find their preferred identity. That's actually from a book I've already covered, Erica Ridley, The Duke Heist. I found that she's like living in Costa Rica and all of these different little tidbits about her, but not how she prefers to identify. So I don't want to misattribute somebody's racial or ethnic identity depending on which they choose to go by. So to me, that's just unknown. And I'm going to keep it that way unless any of you know of like an interview or something where Erica Ridley is talking about her identity in that way. The main forms of representation within the main characters of the books, I had 3 books that had a person of color as the main character or one of the main characters. And then I also had 3 books that had LGBTQIA plus main characters. A lot of that representation actually came from my comic books. There's just a lot of LGBTQIA plus representation in here, which I enjoyed reading quite a bit, but this is predominantly where that was coming from this month. And then I did read 1 nonfiction, and I'm never quite sure how to square that away, because unless we're talking about like a concentrated biography or like focus on a person, it doesn't really feel like there's a main character in general nonfiction. So that book has moments of different kinds of representation, but I'm not quite sure how to categorize it in this system. So just know that like I'll talk about that book today. It was Ghostland by Colin Dickey, and I'll explain myself a little bit better there, but I wasn't quite sure how to describe what quality or quantity of representation that book carried. Then we have our section on content warnings or trigger warnings. And what I like to do, especially since I have this half-month wrap-up, I will always leave stuff like that in the description box below if you're looking for book specifics. I usually will put in like brackets after the book title what kind of content warnings, if there are ones that I can remember. But overall, everything I read this month, what were some of the top content warnings that I would offer in my reading? The 3 ones that I noticed this time around are all kind of equally weighted, so it's not like a 1, 2, 3. It's just kind of like they all had kind of a similar cadence or severity to them. So I'll just go through them in a random order. One of my books did feature an assault, a sexual assault, and that was Pleasure of a Dark Prince by Kresley Cole. Now this, to be clear, it's a romance novel. The assault did not occur by the hero to the heroine. It's part of the heroine's past. So just, it's described as well in the book and not just alluded to. So I think that's always worth calling out. Throughout the comic books, I'm not sure I mentioned this in the video, though I do think I put it in the description box. If not, apologies. But anti-Semitism and racism, because the comic books, the DC Bombshell comic books take place during World War II. At least 2 of our core characters are Jewish, and so they are really struggling, not just with the presence of anti-Semitism in the way some people communicate with them, but the like mass eradication event that was in process during World War II. Closely tied to that, racism is also a factor both in the Bombshell books, but specifically it's discussed in some detail in Ghostland by Colin Dickey. The way that book unfolds ghost stories, which I will again get into in my review here in a minute, but those are my content warnings for the month. Ratings are great this month. Like I said, my average rating was 4.06, so we're doing pretty good. So I didn't have anything that went below a 3. I had 1 3-star rating, 1 3.5-star rating. I had 4 4-star books, no 4.5s, but 2 5-star ratings, and those were both from the DC Bombshells comic books. So for reviews on that, again, go check out the other video. So let me take you through those 2 books as I wrap up April. Okay, so I did it. I read Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton, and I want to take a second to just say thank you again to Dawn, who gifted me this copy. Dawn, it was so good. I gave it 4 stars. I actually like this one better than the first one. I think the first book, Fortuna Sworn, I liked. I think I might have given it 3 stars, maybe 3.5. I was like, I enjoy it. I want to keep going with the series. But let me tell you, Miss KJ Sutton is becoming the queen of the cliffhanger. Like, she just leaves you at these epic points that are wonderful and frustrating at the same time. So I think, honestly, the way this book ended is why I'm giving it 4 stars and not like a 3.5 or a 3. So let me explain some of that a little bit more. So without getting into huge amounts of synopsis for this book, Fortuna Sworn, the first book in the series, is really about the main character, Fortuna, who is a nightmare. And nightmares are a specific type of creature that can, well, bring about your nightmares. They are sensitive to your worst fears and can kind of like make them come to life. And that's a lot of where their power comes from. And Fortuna has a brother who had been missing, Damon, and she's on this quest to find him and keep him safe. But she makes a bargain with a mysterious but handsome fae who says he knows where her brother is and that he can help get him back. That's just the first book. The second book is kind of what happens after, and it's a multi-book series, so like strap in. I feel like I was just kind of churning through this. I was interested, I wasn't mad at anything, but I didn't really get intense until like the last little chunk of it, like maybe the last third of the book, and then I was like, oh, you've got my attention, like, let's go. So I do think it's a little slow pace-wise for me. Also, I will say the romance in this series is so slow burn. Like, you get a little bit of it, bit by bit, and you get tantalized by it. I don't have that kind of patience, Miss Sutton. Like, I'm an impulsive creature. So I'm enjoying the heck out of this story. I still like 4 stars is a great rating for me. But I want some more smut. I'm sure I'll get it in the following books, but the cliffhanger that this ends on just has me so sucked in, and I'm distraught that I did not buy book 3 when I could last buy books, because now I have to wait or like try to check it out from the library. But I'm definitely going to be continuing with this series. I think if you are the kind of person that has been really wanting to check out fantasy romance, this feels, at least in the first 2 books, like really heavy on like the dark fantasy elements with some like slow burn romance, and it's there. There's a lot of like tension and some, you know, like little sprinklings of spice, but it's not too heavy duty. So if you've been looking for one of those, I will say, having not read the rest of the books, I imagine it's gonna get to the point where we get like spicy, at least I hope, but I'm really enjoying this. I also think the covers on these books are so grabbing and gorgeous. It's part of what brought me into the series, that and Becca from Becca in the Books, because she found this one first and has been a big fan ever since. So I'm going to be excited to continue, but it may take me a while to get to book 3. But I enjoyed it. I really like Fortuna Sworn as a character. I really like that she's imperfect and is like aware of her flaws, but not in the way that she's like, I'm going to try to fix all my flaws. It's like, no, I'm just a flawed person. That's fine. I like that we get to see somebody who's a little bit vengeful, who like wants to do better, who's battling her inner demons. It's just really cool. And I've said this before with the first book that I read in the series, but I really like KJ Sutton's take on Fae lore, because there's some things that are like a little consistent throughout, but like the things that she does to make her Fae world unique, like even the fact that Fortuna is a nightmare, I love that. I love that as somebody who enjoys Fae stories. The feeling like there's still something new here is really cool and exciting. Also, I didn't cry, but I got misty in here. You know, I got a little teary-eyed and did a lot of blinking. So it does pull at the heartstrings as well. So again, 4 stars, definitely keeping this. We'll be continuing with the series as soon as I can get my hands on the 3rd one. But again, thank you, Dawn. This was great. Much love. So the last book I have for you today is Ghostland by Colin Dickey. And the reason you'll be seeing the cover up on the screen is I had it initially as a library book. That library book needed to be returned, and so I rechecked it out as an ebook. So this is one of my ebook reads for the month. And this is the book that has like some mild trigger warnings for things like discussions of racism, racial violence, as well as I believe there's like some deep-rooted discussion about like history of sexism and like physical or emotional trauma. So this book is about ghosts, but not in the way you think. So I gave this book 3.5 stars. This was actually a friend recommendation from work who thought I would really love this. And I did really enjoy it, but I think I went in with a different set of expectations that kind of messed with my perception of the book a little bit. I actually recommend this book to any of you who are really interested in history and vaguely interested in ghosts and ghost stories. And I say vaguely interested because I think if you're the kind of like true believer, like you are a hardcore believer in ghosts, this book might ruffle your feathers in a way. Dickey doesn't set out to debunk ghost stories, but this is not a book about the ghost stories predominantly, if that makes sense. Dickey even says in the beginning that he's not interested in debunking, but he's also not interested in providing proof of ghosts either. He's kind of somewhere in the middle. He wants to understand how ghost stories come to be. Like, why do they capture our imaginations? What is at the core of a ghost story? And so each chapter kind of tackles a couple of different specific local ghost stories. And Colin Dickey grew up not too far from the famous Winchester house that is allegedly very haunted. So that's where some of his early fascination began. But a lot of what he does in each of these chapters is fascinating. Like, he'll tell you the ghost story and talk a little bit about some people who feel like they've confirmed it or have like sought out the ghost story. But then he does a little bit of what would be considered debunking, where he's like, you know, if you look at the records, nobody by that name existed. So for example, there is a chapter that he has on why are plantations so haunted? So in looking at something like a plantation and exploring the ghost stories of a specific plantation, he picks apart what about that cultural experience haunts America. Like, particularly, this is an American-focused book. So he will tell this, the ghost story that he tells in that chapter about the plantations. He goes through the record. There are no records of a slave by that name existing at this plantation. So this is something that has kind of captured the mindset, and people have what they feel to be very real experiences, but it's not accurate. So why are we haunted by this? That doesn't make it any less real for any of the people who have had experiences, he says, but he wants to get to the bottom of, like, why is this story the story that is prevalent when there were probably much greater atrocities underneath it. And so it's really interesting to see how he kind of lightly debunks with history, but also keeps that core open-mindedness that hauntings have different meanings. And especially when we think about our cultural history. He also talks about, in another chapter, like the history of what were at the time called insane asylums or sanitariums. And so things like that, and like the absolutely awful treatment that was perpetrated in those asylums is part of why we think of those spaces as so haunted, because there's so much trauma there. So it was really interesting to kind of read the history of these things and pick apart the ghostliness of them. It also talks about like the prison industrial complex. So I wouldn't call this like a social justice read, but it's like the meeting between ghosts and social justice. That's what this book is. So if that's interesting to you, I actually highly recommend this book. I enjoyed it. I just was kind of maybe looking for a little bit more ghosty nonsense than I got in the book, which is my expectation rather than the author's fault. And that's what created my personal rating for it. But I do think it's a really interesting read, and it's one that I'm going to continue to think about for a really long time. And I hope I did it justice in explaining it that way. It's just a really unique little book, and if you're intrigued, check it out. I returned it to my local library, but I was very happy to read it. Okay, that is my April wrap-up with all of the fun stats that I like to track. Oh, you know what? I forgot to ask you a question for recommendations. I also forgot to do this last month, but I'm just going to ask you one question instead of two. So for recommendations, what are some of your favorite translated works? I've had a really good time reading some translated works, like Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and I really would like to have some more recommendations from you. So just let me know down in the comments below, what are some of your favorite translated works? Thank you for spending time with me. I hope you've had a fantastic reading day. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more from me or this channel, and I'll see you in the next one.